I want to talk about two-generation programs, programs that provide services both to parents and children, and ask the question whether that combination can be synergistic. In other words, can a coordinated combination of parent and child programs best help disadvantaged children? Let me set the stage with a little bit of comparative data from the United States and the LSAC Australian Child Survey. This is work by Bruce Bradbury and colleagues. A very nice comparative book of Australia and the UK and the US and Canada about the relative well-being of children and families. And in this case, they took a look at achievement gaps. And I'm just highlighting the US data and the Australia data here. We all know that children growing up in lower SES families do worse in terms of achievement than kids growing up in higher SES families. This is a particular comparison of children in families with mothers who were college graduates. That represents high SES. And children with mothers who did not attend college at all. That's low SES. So this gap of 1.00 standard deviations in the United States is the difference in kindergarten entry achievement test scores between kids in high and low SES defined that way. One standard deviation is huge. One standard deviation is about what children learn over the course of kindergarten. Right? So you can think about this 1.00 as showing that kids growing up in low SES families are already a year behind in terms of their achievement when school starts. The gaps in Australia are smaller. The United States always leads the way in biggest gaps ever. Australia is half a standard deviation. In other words, low SES kids are about half a year behind the high SES or high SES counterparts. And so that's where they start. That's what early childhood conditions have produced in terms of these gaps. And then they go into the education system. And it's interesting to see how, as kids grow older, these gaps change. One might hope that schools would be equalizing agents. In the United States, they don't seem to be in the sense that the gaps are just as large 2 years later, age 7 and 9, 5 years later at age 11. One of the things we discovered, thank you for the plug, Ben, with the Wither Opportunity and Restoring Opportunity books. One of the chapters, right, in Wither Opportunity is a gigantic book that I wouldn't recommend anyone read. But Restoring Opportunity is 140 pages. And I should mention, I didn't mean to plug my book here, but if you don't have to read it, but take a look at restoringopportunity.com, which is the website for the book. And one of the things we were able to do was to hire a documentary filmmaker to produce short 6-minute videos showing the education settings that we highlight. We picked 3, a preschool, a charter school, and then a high school that had been shown based on good, solid evidence to be superior in terms of their ability to bring up low SES kids. And these 6-minute videos show the kind of practices that these schools are engaging in that seem to make the difference, restoringopportunity.com. But one of the things we discovered in Wither Opportunity is if you look at expenditures, I was talking with Ben's group yesterday, and there are data to look at this in Australia, but no one has done it yet. If you look in the United States at family expenditures, enrichment expenditures on kids over the last 40 years, right? So you take an expenditure survey and see what they're spending on lessons and private schools and computers and things like that. In the United States now, that has grown for high SES families to $10,000 per child per year. $10,000 per child per year. That's the top 20% of families ranked by income. That's about what schools spend on kids. So schools have a huge headwind that they're pushing against to try to reduce these achievement gaps. It used to be only about $3,300. Now it's up to $10,000. Be interesting to see what it is in Australia. But there's really no change in gaps. They're just as large really at the end of high school as they are at the beginning of kindergarten, which emphasizes the importance of trying to get things right in the first few years. In Australia, they're still smaller than the US, but there's this worrisome growth in these gaps over the first 6 years of school. I haven't yet found someone who has a good explanation for this, but it's really quite worrisome, right? That not only are there gaps at the beginning of school, but if anything, they grow over the course of school. So this is serving as, I hope, inspiration in the work that we need to get to. And if we focus on those school entry gaps, we've got a variety of child-based and parent-based services and programs that we might deploy to address these gaps. So I'm interested in whether a combination of these child-based and parent-based programs are going to be better than either one or the other taken by themselves. So the kind of programs I'm talking about, child-based programs are typically early care and early education. Both our countries have systems and subsidies for both. Parent-based programs are pretty diverse. There are parent skill programs, including home visitation. There can also be parenting skill programs delivered in classrooms. But there are also parent skill programs that focus on the parent's job skills or language skills, right? So you can think of combining a child-based program, education program, let's say, with one of these kinds of parenting skill programs. And the question is whether you get more bang for the buck by combining the two. In other words, does 1 + 1 equal more than 2? Right? That's really the equation that I'm interested in. They would if programs complement one another, if they're synergistic, but they're not going to be even equal to 2 if they substitute for one another, right? If they're redundant to some extent in the kind of programming that they offer. 1 + 1 greater than 2 is a high standard. I'm setting up my kind of bottom line, which is that it's very hard to find instances where 1 + 1 is greater than 2. But it is a very high standard. You can have an effective child program, an effective parenting program that pass the cost-benefit test that you ought to put in place. But they might not be synergistic, but it still might be valuable to have both of them in place. So what sort of evidence could I dig up for 1 + 1 being greater than 2? There is a meta-analysis that I've been part of that is trying to synthesize intervention research published between 1960 and 2007 on intervention programs of various kinds directed toward the early years. And in this case, for this particular analysis, we took the subset of intervention analyses of programs that had a contrast, a random assignment contrast between merely offering early education programming to kids, Head Start, for example. A lot of these are Head Start centers. So kids were either assigned just to that or that plus a parenting program of some kind, right? So this is a broad look across all the literature to try to see to what extent adding that parenting component added to child outcomes. In this case, the child outcomes are achievement-related outcomes. And the answer is 1 + 1 = 1. In other words, there were no significant differences in these achievement outcomes between the programs with and without the parenting components. Right? A very disappointing result. There was some indication that that programs that combine early education with home visitation were somewhat had somewhat more positive outcomes, but it wasn't close to being statistically significant. And the same thing was true with this contrast between kind of classroom parenting versus parent modeling programs. There was a little bit of indication that the modeling programs might have performed better, But the bottom line from the literature really is that 1 + 1 = 1 in this case, that these parenting components, at least as they've been developed in the literature, haven't added significantly to what the early education program can do. Then I ran across this remarkable Danish study. I don't know if anyone has seen it. It's a NBER working paper where it took advantage of the fact that historically, over a 30-year period beginning in 1930, Denmark rolled out home visitation programs and early education programs, fairly high-quality programs, across municipalities in a fairly haphazard kind of way. And the bottom line here is that a combination of the two programs, 1 + 1 = 1.2. Right? So you get 20% better when you combine the two. But let me tell you about this study. It took advantage of a kind of natural experiment where municipalities took up either a very high-quality home visitation program that the country designed and rolled out, and/or a fairly high-quality early education program, right? And it was rolled out across municipalities over this almost 30-year period between 1933 and 1960. Somewhat surprisingly, there was very little correlation between the municipalities that took up the home visitation programs and put those in place versus the municipalities that took up the early education programs, right? So it seemed to be fairly random whether a child was growing up in an area that had neither of the programs, one but not the other, or in some cases both, right? And so you can see, based on wonderful Danish administrative data, I want to return to the importance of administrative data repeatedly during my talk, that, I don't know if you know about these registers that the Scandinavian countries have, but here you can see kids who are growing up in different municipalities and then examine years later how much schooling they'd completed, what their labor market success was in terms of their earnings. You know about mortality and health, and you know who the children of these children are, so you can follow those kids and see, in this case, how much schooling they completed. So you can answer the question, does growing up in a municipality that had one or both of these programs boost these outcomes, education, wages, and health, in the first generation for the kids who actually may have taken up the program, and are there second generation outcomes? So let me start with my first aside on the importance of administrative data. I know that there are efforts in Australia, there certainly are in the United States, to, with due regard to privacy issues, try to put together administrative data from various sources. And this study gives you an idea of the power of administrative data, linked administrative data, to understand program impacts for programs that might have occurred 80 years ago. So what do they find? They found for the children in municipalities that only had early education programs, the kind of comparison they did was between kids who were old enough to be in a municipality when that program was in place versus slightly older kids who just missed the opportunity to be in that municipality's early care or home visitation program. Right? So very similar kinds of people, just a couple of years apart, and it just so happened that some of them were lucky enough to be able to participate in the program, and some were born a little bit too early and missed it. They were already off in school. So with this comparison, what you find is that the kids in the municipalities with this early education program had higher schooling, had higher wages, had better health, and had kids who completed more schooling. Right? The impacts were about a tenth of a year of schooling, for example, but only 10% of the kids in a municipality on average participated in the program. Right? So if you ask what's the likely effect of this program on the kids who actually were in the program, you need to scale it up by a factor of 10, and then you're getting more than a year extra of completed schooling. So it's a pretty respectable effect size. In the case of the home visitation program, very similar kinds of benefits. The kids who were in home visitation programs but not in a municipality with early education also had more schooling, higher earnings, and better health. It turns out for the home visitation programs, there was no second generation impact that was detectable, but in terms of immediate impacts on kids' long-run prospects, it seemed that both of these programs worked. What about the combination? Somewhat surprisingly, the combination only added about 20% to the benefits of having one or the other. Right? So in the case of these two programs, they seem to be somewhat substitutes for one another. Right? So they independently had effects, but when you combine them, you didn't really get a synergistic effect. There is also a large literature in the United States, random assignment evaluations of a number of teen parent demonstrations that tried to provide two-generation programming. You can see some of the names here: New Chance, Learning and Earning, Teen Parent Demonstration, all well-intentioned, often providing job skills and life skills to the parents, coupled with child care and early education opportunities for the kids. And these studies uniformly produce disappointing results. Very few significant differences for the kids who were in these programs versus the kids who weren't, right? So in this case, again, you don't have much synergy between the two. I want to talk about a number of resources during my talk, and one is an issue of the journal Future of Children. Many of you, I'm sure, know about Future of Children. It's an online journal that Princeton University and Brookings Institution publish. It's free. They do a very good job of focusing on various topics related to children, policy relevant. In this case, there was an issue on two-generation programs, helping parents, helping children, two-generation mechanisms. And Lindsay Chase Lansdale and Jean Brooks Gunn have a very nice chapter kind of summarizing the existing evidence and then talking about the nature of two-generation programs of the future. And they provide this review of these past programs that haven't been shown to be effective, but then they highlight, in the United States at least, what the new ideas are for these two-generation programs. And they're very much focused in terms of parent skills on parent employment skills, with the idea that if you can boost those skills and combine it with a very high-quality early education program system, that you can have maybe synergistic effects. Right? It's too early to know. The jury is still out. But that's the kind of direction that's being taken in the United States. As I say, I couldn't find any solid evaluation evidence that 1 + 1 is greater than 2, or even that 1 + 1 = 2, right? So I don't think, based on the evidence, we can be confident that the combinations of these programs will always or even ever be synergistic. Right? We should keep trying. We should keep evaluating them. But up till now, I think the evidence is fairly negative. You know, I have to say, you sign up to be a keynote speaker, and they want, 6 months in advance, send in your topic. So I sent in this, title is pretty catchy, and I expected to have all sorts of good news about programs. And as the deadline approached, I kept searching and searching. So the news is not as good as it might be, but it should inspire us to try to think of program models, well, learn from the past and try to develop program models that do work. But in thinking about it, maybe these two-generation programs aren't magic bullets, right? Parents and kids certainly have unmet needs. We have effective programs for addressing some of them, but coupling them together may just be too rigid and complicated, right? A huge problem, I think, that many of us encounter is actually getting parents to show up for parenting programs, right? It's very hard to do that. Parents lead complicated lives, especially now that there's a big push for parents to be working full-time if at all possible. So if you couple together a parent program with a child program and kind of force the two to be offered simultaneously, you build in a kind of inflexibility that might be worse than offering the two separately, where you can have somewhat more flexibility in trying to get and tailor the programs and when they're offered to the parents themselves. You know, I didn't want to stop after 15 minutes in my talk, and I wanted to talk about two-generation programs of a different kind where it's a parent-based program where without separate programming for kids, if you improve the parents' lives sufficiently, you can carry over and benefit the kids, right? And as I think about the low-hanging fruit for what kind of programs are most needed, it's really all about eliminating these thankfully rare cases where toxic stress in the home is present, and eliminating that toxic stress can produce huge benefits for kids. So let me talk a little bit about toxic stress. Toxic stress is a term that was invented really by a group called the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child. This is Jack Schoenkoff's group at Harvard University. His center is called the Center for the Developing Child. If you Google that, get to their website, there's a wonderful set of resources that are available. But I've had the privilege of being the kind of token social scientist to go along with the neuroscientists on this network. We've been at it for about 15 years now. But over the course of those years, it's really been the neuroscientists working with translators, including Frameworks, which is a wonderful messaging firm that works with social and behavioral scientists to try to get their messages across. And toxic stress was one of the early kind of concepts that got developed. But unfortunately, it's mutated into something that's almost unrecognizable now. So I thought I'd take a little time to talk about what is and isn't toxic stress and how important true toxic stress is and its elimination. So stress, responding to stress, is a perfectly normal feature of life. And kids need to learn to respond to stress in ways that is healthy and not damaging to them. So when we're stressed, stress hormones, cortisol in particular, help us respond, and heart rate increases, blood pressure, inflammatory reactivity, blood sugar, all these changes take place when we are exposed to some kind of stress. But for young kids, buffering support from a caregiver helps to bring the child back to normal, right? And that kind of stress response is a very, very normal kind of thing that all kids need to develop. And the taxonomy that the National Scientific Council has developed is between positive stress, tolerable stress, and toxic stress, right? So positive stress is the good kind of stress. All kids need to have healthy stress reactivity, brief increases in the heart rate, mild increases in hormone levels, quickly restored back to baseline levels. Tolerable stress might arise when there's a serious event for a child, death of a relative, maybe some disaster of some sort, natural disaster of some sort. And there might be a very serious stress response, but with, again, supportive caregivers, children can get that under control and come back down to baseline levels. What's unacceptable are situations of toxic stress, right? Where prolonged activation of stress systems in the absence of protective relationships can damage lifelong health. John Lynch will talk a bit about this tomorrow, I know. So what kind of stress situations are toxic stress situations? These are toxic stress situations arising from recurrent physical or emotional abuse, chronic neglect, caregiver substance abuse or mental illness, repeated exposures to violence. Right? So again, not a huge number of kids are exposed to these kind of conditions, thank goodness, but when they are, they can have extremely damaging effects for kids. Both animal experiments as well as kind of natural experiments from adoption studies from orphanages and things like that can show how damaging toxic stress can be for kids and how important it is to address this. But toxic stress these days has kind of morphed from its original intent to something that's almost unrecognizable. It's kind of like what people do with preschool when they say, well, it returned $10 per dollar spent, therefore my program is going to produce $10 per dollar spent. You know, toxic stress is something that people evoked all the time now to justify any sort of parent or child-directed program. I hope I'm not stepping on any toes here. I looked at the Australian internet and tried to come up with an example of toxic stress being used in a cavalier kind of way. Dr. Cris, I don't know if Dr. Cris is a name that some of you know, but anyway, she has healthy habits, and this is number 26, say goodbye to toxic stress. To halt the stress response, you don't want to halt it, right? You want to bring it back down to normal. Stop and take 10 slow, deep breaths. Repeat this several times a day before sleep at night, right? So that's what toxic stress is now. So I want to make clear about the original intention of toxic stress. It's a very solid kind of concept grounded in neuroscience. It's vitally important as we do our work to recognize circumstances of toxic stress for kids and to remediate it. So if I were saying what the highest one of the highest priority areas should be for parenting help that is going to have second generation benefits, it's addressing these circumstances of true toxic stress. And we need a national network of effective, well-resourced public programs to detect and remediate conditions that are likely to generate toxic stress in children. I know all of our countries struggle with putting together this kind of network. I know it's not perfect in Australia, but if I were wanting to do one thing to ensure that kids were going to have a chance of growing up in a healthy kind of way, it would be to ensure that there was a comprehensive national system, a well-functioning system that addressed these situations of toxic stress. I think some people think of home visitation programs as one solution to this. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the evidence on home visitation programs. I know that these are in various stages of rollout in Australia. There was a very nice review from a government project called HOMVEE, H-O-M-V-E-E. There's a nice website for its activities. Mathematica, which is a very high-quality research firm in the United States, engaged in a very broad literature review of home visitation programs. They reviewed 35 different models. They had a fairly rigorous standard of evidence. 14 of them met the standards. And I want to issue a warning here. I'm going to get grumpy. I am appalled at how evidence is abused, I think, in our field, where the production of the evidence tends to be focusing on getting that p less than 0.05. There's a publication bias toward articles that have p less than 0.05. And then we tend to cherry pick if we're looking at a study that maybe had 10 different outcomes and one of them was p less than 0.05, that's the one we point to and say this program worked. So one of the nice things about this review is it provides a kind of perspective on what these different models were able to do in terms of generating impacts. So this is a subset that had at least two of these kind of outcomes measured. Nurse-family partnership is, of course, the David Olds model that everyone points to. It produced evidence of positive parenting practices 4 times across the evaluations that were published, 5 instances where child development and school readiness outcomes were significantly affected, and 7 instances where there were reduction in child maltreatment, right? So this is kind of the gold standard model that people turn to. But we need to know what the denominators are for these numbers, right? If you go and test 20 different outcomes and one of them shows up as being significant and you have p less than 0.05, it could be completely by chance, right? So if you add the denominators in, you get some pretty big numbers in those denominators, right? You still get ratios that are indicating something's there, but in the case of the positive parenting practices, there were really 22 of them were tested, and only 4 turned out to be statistically significant. Child development outcomes, it was about 5 of 60. And reductions in child maltreatment, it was 7 of 25, right? So I think we need to pay attention both to the numerators here as well as the denominators. If you keep at this literature review and look at some of the other models and the evidence, there's a nurse-family partnership on top, 4 of 22 in terms of positive parenting practices. You can look down the list. I know HOMVEE is something that's being rolled out pretty ambitiously here. That actually, in its evaluations, was showing positive impacts on positive parenting practices in only 1 of 10 times. You know, I know triple P is big, and I tried to find out from the Mathematica people before my presentation why triple P didn't make it into their literature review. They had, I don't know what the selection criteria are, but email me after, in a couple days, they said they would investigate it and come back to me. But these are the kind of numerators and denominators you get if you look to the child development and school readiness numbers. Again, it's a mixed bag. You never actually have a situation where you're producing significant effects in more than half of the tests, right? So you need to be very cautious when you're reading this literature. Reduction in child maltreatment, there's really not much evidence at all, right? In most of these evaluations, child maltreatment was not an outcome that was tested. So if we really, and you know, the David Olds really stands out as the only study that is, seems to have any real substantial positive evidence of reducing child maltreatment. So if we think about toxic stress and home visitation as a way of reducing it, the evidence base really is largely non-existent for being able to judge that. I hope that I can inspire people involved in some of these evaluations to think about the range of outcomes, including child maltreatment, that you might want to include as outcomes. So we're still a long way off from being able to point with confidence to program models for home visitation that will work in all communities. I want to bring some information to your attention that you might find useful. This Center for the Developing Child website is an incredible resource. They've spent a lot of money developing animations that explain brain architecture, that explain the basic kind of concepts, serve and return, toxic stress, executive function, and do it in a very appealing way that will engage audiences that you might be dealing with. So I would urge you to spend a little time looking at the Center for the Developing Child. One of its most recent publications, painfully produced over 2 years, I can testify to that personally, is this report called From Best Practices to Breakthrough Impacts. It provides, in the first third or so, an accessible review of the science of early development. It's interesting to see how much more we know now than 15 years before when the first version of this program, when this kind of publication came out. It provides a summary of some of the intervention research from this meta-analysis project that I've been associated with. And then it gets fairly speculative in the last third or so to think about dynamic strategies for generating programs. It's kind of a bubbling up from the ground strategy where states or cities are developing programs and then sharing them and then evaluating them and in a way that is going to be true to the science, but also in a way that's going to provide the kind of evaluation evidence that we really need to decide whether these programs are working or not. This HOMVEE effort was the first stage preceding a very ambitious evaluation of a number of home visitation models. So in a couple years, we'll have results from those evaluations, random assignment of kids going into to HIPPY, to nurse home visitation programs, as actually implemented by states, right? So you get real practical information about how effective programs are if states are going through all the complications of taking a model program and trying to scale them up and actually train workers to administer the program. So that's a preview of coming attractions. Another activity of Jack Shunkoff's center is to develop measures of toxic stress in kids. This will be a very, very important activity. How can you measure stress reactivity in kids in a way to judge whether or not they seem to be suffering from toxic stress? So they say that that's going to become available probably within the year. And as usual, all this information gets shared right away. And the last resource I want to point to is something that'll be ready probably in the late summer. It's a National Academies of Sciences report called Supporting the Parents of Young Children, which is a very comprehensive, I was on this committee and we tried to make it 250 pages and ended up being 400 pages. But it just is a very comprehensive review of universal programs for supporting parents, as well as more specialized programs supporting particular needs of parents, drug abuse, mental health problems, and things like that, as well as programs trying to address particular special needs for kids of different categories. So it's a very nice, comprehensive kind of review of that. It should be available probably in August, September at the latest. And as usual, all these National Academies reports are available online as well. So that's another free resource. So let me return to my question, whether 1 + 1 is greater than 2. I want to try to end on a positive note. And think again about the Danish study, right? So plugging again administrative data, researchers using administrative data, were able to discover that these programs, a home visitation program, an early education program, really helped. They produced big impacts, right? Kids growing up in these municipalities completed more schooling, they earned more, they were healthier, and their kids attain more schooling as well, right? So having good programming can actually make a big difference. And then children in the municipalities with the home visitation program, the same kind of thing. Not the second generation outcome, but the first generation outcome years later. So even though their combination wasn't synergistic, each program by itself was quite effective. So if we think about what we need to do for the next 3 days, we can be encouraged by the fact that our countries have programs that actually work. If you think about K-12 schooling, we complain about it all the time, but it's really been the engine that's fueled a lot of our economic growth. We can do that. Our child protective service systems are far from perfect, but they are helping large numbers of kids who very much need the help. So, we're in a good position now. We've got promising program models that didn't exist before. We have administrative data systems that we're putting in place. Just we're in a much stronger position to implement and improve and evaluate these kind of programs that we desperately need to help our young children and their families. Let's get to work. Thank you.